Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be discussing cooking and relationships with our special guest, Krista Melanson. So thank you for joining us today, Krista.
Thanks so much for having me, Sean and Amanda. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
This is
We're really excited.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about this because I love cooking. So this is going to be so fun. But before we jump in, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Krista. I am the relationship chef. I went to Le Cordon Bleu in Paris years ago and graduated with the full meal deal of pastry and cuisine. And I worked as a chef for many years until deciding to start a family and couldn't imagine being pregnant in the kitchen. And so I started on a different tact and was doing relationship coaching, which I eventually morphed into the relationship chef because I was missing that passion of cooking that I always had. And the two, I really believe that food is a love language. So for me, relationships and food were such a natural fit to bring together.
Yeah, cooking is one of the things that I love. The thing I love the most about cooking is that kind of relationship and bringing people together piece, because I get no more enjoyment than making a meal and seeing my wife eat it and then she'd be like, yep, this is really good, or you outdid yourself with this one. I'm like, yes. Yeah, love that feeling.
Yeah, it's so good. And you think about any occasion that you have in your life, whether it's a birthday, graduation, anniversary, wedding, whatever, food is always central, right? It's an important part.
I was just gonna say that growing up, it didn't matter what occasion it was all about the food, right? I come from a Mexican family, and so every, not every year because life, but when we would get together at Christmas to make tamales together and just doing all of those things with your aunts and your mom and your sisters and cousins, just everybody coming together to do that piece. I grew up really loving that part of it. And so cooking food for a group of people is my happy place. So many people are oh my gosh, I hate hosting. I don't want anybody to have Thanksgiving here. I'm I will do all the prep work. I will do all the cooking. We don't have to have it at my house because my house isn't really set up for a great big group of people, but let's do it at your house and I'll do all the cooking.
Oh, I'm exactly the same way. The more people around, the better. And actually, just this weekend, my partner and I started planning a garage warming party because we just built a garage. And of course, the first thing I'm okay, I'm going to make this, and I'm going to make this, and I'll have this, and we'll do this, and let's do that. And he's like, okay.
Whatever you want, I guess.
Yeah. I'll eat it. You make it, I'll eat it.
Yeah, literally any occasion to set up. I'm well, you're going to have food. So it better, hopefully it's good food.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know if other people understand this, total fear that I have of running out of something. Oh yeah. My gosh. There is always enough food to feed an entire army because I'm well, what if only everybody wants to eat hot dogs and not a single person eats a hamburger? I have to have enough hot dogs to feed everybody, but I also have to have hamburgers to feed everybody because what if nobody wants a hot dog? Right. So I make 10 times more food than is ever needed. But there's always still that fear in me that oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of food and then people aren't going to have it. And they're going to be like, what is she doing? She doesn't know how to host a party. She's not taking care of us.
Yeah. And I used to do catering for a living. And so I know roughly, well, I've probably forgotten, but the formulas for how much food to prepare, I ignore them because I think, well, what if everyone arrives starving?
Yeah.
I would be mortified if I ran out of food. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Amanda. There's no way I'm running out of food.
I'm so glad that you feel this with me.
I'm also glad it's not it's a good like close to universal thing, like for people who are hosting, because I do the same exact thing too.
Yeah.
It's like if I'm making burgers and hot dogs, like everyone's eating 4 or 5 of them before we
Very
like
much
get
so.
close to running out. And then including like knowing that how my friends eat, one of them will eat 7 or 8 of them if I need him to. So,
Exactly.
but looking at some of the work that you have done, or like what led you to this point, Krista, I know you kind of mentioned a little bit that you were missing that piece when you started to work with relationships. So really, what was the driving force on how you started to include cooking in that work with relationships?
Well, I mean, of course, the inspiration behind a lot of it is my relationship with my partner, and that sort of inspires me to want. That's what inspired me to want to do the relationship coaching in the first place, is wanting other people to feel that satisfaction, contentment, fulfillment that I get from my own relationship. And um, it was really just, there's something missing here, and what is it that's important to me in my life? And of course, it was the food part of it. And I thought, how can I combine these two things? Because I absolutely do not want to go back to a kitchen cooking full time, but I want it to be a part of my life and a part of what I do, but not even just a little side hustle, doing this, that, or the other thing. And so I started to think about how my relationship is, and how, it's not centered around food, but food plays very much a central role. And how happy my partner is when like you said, Sean, with your wife, how happy he is when I make him something amazing, and how fun it is for us to be in the kitchen together, and, laughing and connecting, and just having fun. And I thought, you know what? This is a way that I can take the relationship coaching one step further to help people, but not just endless hours of awkward conversation. It's a doing, it's a taking action. Let's take action. Let's get into the kitchen. Let's cook a meal together. Let's create this situation where we have to work as a team, and all the other little pieces kind of fall in together with it, and it becomes an amazing date night that's fun and enjoyable, but also you're creating an amazing meal.
I love it. It's great. And you can learn so much about your partner from cooking, right? Like you you just the time you spend together, or the way that they do this thing or that thing, and you can see a lot of like how they were brought up, right? Because that's where we originally learned to cook from, is how our parents cooked or how our guardians cook. And it just gives you a little bit of that insight into like what their past was like, especially if it's like a new relationship. Like
Yeah,
it gives you that little glimpse.
exactly. And the other thing is too, that's kind of a side benefit of it, is learning to accept that everybody's different. So in this situation, that your partner is different, and they may have a different way to chop an onion than you do, but learning that it's okay for them to do it differently, and embracing their differences too. And you think creating a meal is not something that's going to be like that, but it really is, because there's more than one way to do just about everything. And well, I would like to believe my way, of course, is the best way. It's possible my partner is allowed to have a little bit of input from time to time. And, it's, I remember ages ago, one of the first inkling I had that, he had some game in the kitchen. We weren't even living together, and I made ribs for the kids. And I said, I've got these ribs left over. And he said, why don't you just chop up the meat and turn it into pulled pork? And I'm like, I never thought of that. But it was a great idea, right? I took it up, I took it apart, I shredded it, I put it in a container, put some barbecue sauce on, and froze it for another day. But, it's somebody can bring a whole different perspective, and there's no right or wrong. It's just allowing other people their input, their ideas, whatever.
I think it's also fun when it comes to like cooking with someone in the kitchen, or like having them make something that especially meant something to them when they were younger. Because like you said, we learned to cook from our parents. And the example that I have of this is my wife still finds it, I think, a little bit weird. I would always make, as a kid, because my mom made it for me, it was peanut butter toast, and then you just like fold it in half and just dip it in chocolate milk. Which sounds like, to someone who's never eaten it, like your bread's just gonna get soggy. Like, why would you do that? I'm like, it's the best thing in the world. And I absolutely love it. And I made it for her one time in the morning, and she's like, what are you doing? I was like, just do this. Just try it. And she's like, she said it was okay. I think she was lying because of the soggy bread part. But you really kind of get like an insight too into like someone's lived experiences based on the things that they really enjoy cooking. So it's just a fun part about it.
And it can be really fun to have your partner cook something entirely or help you cook something that is your forte, right? That's your sort of family tradition, and teach them that. And I know with Billy, there's been rumors, but I've never actually seen it, but there's been rumors of a comfort food meal that his family used to have that I think had something to do with mashed potatoes, ground beef, tomato soup, and corn.
Sounds
And
good.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound bad. And every once in a while, he'll say, I should make that for you sometime. And I'm like, yes, you should make that for me. I haven't yet seen it, but we'll
So,
see.
like, I don't know if it's the exact same thing, but replace like corn with green beans. And my husband grew up eating this casserole that was exactly that. It was like the meat and the green beans and the tomato soup, and then like mashed potatoes on top, and then cheese on top of that, and then it was baked.
Yeah, so maybe
He
it is.
he was asking me all the time, like, oh, you got to make this casserole. You got to make this casserole. I'm like, I don't know how to do it. Get the recipe from your mom. I've never heard of this before. So his mom sends the recipe over, and I was like, all right. So we kind of made it once together because I was like, you got to tell me how this needs to be. I don't know. And then because he loved it so much, he made it like 4 times after that. Like, I was like, I'm eating a lot of this casserole and I don't know how great that, but you know what? You're cooking the meal and I don't have to do it, so I'm happy for it, whatever it is. But
Exactly.
like it's those things where what it was so important to him growing up, like that was their comfort food, right? And like then I have like meals that we made when I was growing up that like this is my absolute favorite meal of all time and you will never convince me anything else otherwise.
Mhm.
And to be able to make that and then have him be like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. Like, we need to have this all the time." And yes, we do. This is all we're ever going to eat again. Um, so, but like that makes me so happy. It brings me so much joy to know that like he loves this thing that I also love and that means so much. It doesn't mean you have to enjoy each other's like peanut butter toast dipped in chocolate milk kind of stuff, but you know it's important to someone else, right? And so you're going to give it a shot and you're going to be like, okay, well, maybe I'll just have chocolate milk and toast separate if that's okay.
It's an acknowledgement. It's, I hear you. I understand this is important to you, and I'm willing to give it some space to try it out. And I think that that's, especially when it comes to comfort food, and the whole idea about comfort food is it's supposed to be comforting. And there are those meals like Sean with your grilled or peanut butter sandwich with chocolate milk, you take a bite and you're instantly taken back to a more innocent time where you can relax and think, yeah, I remember the feeling associated with that. And that's what's amazing about food, right? There are feelings associated with so many things, and it can take you right back to the more innocent days when you're happy and things are going on. And that's why they call it comfort food. And it is very powerful like that.
And the way that food also like makes you feel, not only can it help like take you to like those moments when you were younger, but if my wife and I are working in the kitchen and we both are working on this thing and it comes out great, like that's now one of those memories too. So every time we're making this now, like we get to think like we had so much fun making this, we had so much fun eating this. It's
Or memory activated.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's food is a great connector, and even if you don't have the ability to communicate with somebody, like you can still connect to them through food.
Oh, definitely. And you also think of the flip side of that, which is you and your wife take the time to make something and it's an absolute disaster. You laugh about it, you relax, and it was the adventure getting there. And you're also going to remember that, right? It's like, oh, do you remember that time we made it and it was so terrible, right? Like it doesn't even have to be perfect for it to be a memory and something that we share and laugh about, good or bad.
I just have to share this now. I accidentally at one point made mashed potatoes with like vanilla flavored like almond milk or soy milk or something like that because it was just milk in the fridge and I just used it, right? And we both like took a bite and it was like mashed potato milkshake and it was god awful. This was 12, 15 years ago now. We still laugh about that to this day. Hey, how about we have some mashed potato milkshakes? Or remember that time that we did this? So, yeah, absolutely. It can be a disaster and it can still take you back to a great memory.
Definitely. I think it was probably 22, 23 years ago with my dad, similar mashed potato thing. He made packaged mashed and my dad could cook, right? But for whatever reason, he was really excited. He wanted to make mashed potatoes and he used the juice from cooking the beets. So they were dark, deep, screaming red mashed potatoes. And he thought that was the coolest thing. And I'm like, okay. Right?
Well,
I mean, that does give me ideas though.
it does.
Right? It wasn't totally misguided, but it was just odd.
Yeah. Well, it's also kind of like a fun thing when looking at, especially in early in a relationship, if you're trying to figure out how somebody is going to respond either to adversity or to like working as a team. Cooking is a great way to do that early on. Because like if you end up messing it up, you used almond vanilla milk while making mashed potatoes. How's that person responding? Is it like, oh, this is a nightmare, everything is ruined, or well, we messed up, guess we're going to eat Taco Bell? Like,
Yeah.
how do they adapt? How can they like work through that? And I think it's just like a good like early relationship thing to just try out.
Definitely
Absolutely.
a little glimpse.
Yeah, it's a very low risk way to do it, right? Like it's just dinner. You can go to Taco Bell and get a burrito and like you'll be fine. You'll live through it. But and also with like the cooking with someone, if they're telling you that no, this is the only way you can cut an onion, otherwise it's wrong and you're stupid, they're probably going to act that way in other aspects of your relationship as well.
Bit of a red flag waving there.
Right.
Well, and it was one of the things I had to get used to like early in my relationship with Jordan is I was single for a while, I'd done my own, so all of my cooking stuff, it was like just stuff that I always did, so it was never getting anybody's input. I was like, this is how I do it, like this is fine. And I remember distinctly like one day we were making chicken tacos and we had to shred the chicken, so I'm over there with 2 forks just like kind of like splitting it apart because didn't have anything else. There was also a great chicken shredder thing on Amazon for like $15. Wonderful thing, absolutely purchase it. But me using the forks, I was like, Jordan, can you help me like shred this like while we're doing it? She's like, oh yeah. And she just takes one of the forks and just starts like mushing the chicken breast to like split it up. I was like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm shredding it. I was like,
Are you though?
I was like, are you shredding it? Shredding requires like pulling. And I was like, it was something that I like sat with for a second. I was like, no, like it's still getting done. Like you asked for help. This is the help you're getting. You didn't say, can you please do this with 2 forks? And like, even if she does it differently, like the end result is the same. So it's like, you have to like also really think like, one, this isn't a hill I'm absolutely going to die on. Like this is a stupid hill to die on.
Right.
But also, like you said earlier, Krista, everyone has different ways of doing things. And if the result is the same, does it really matter if it was done differently?
No, for sure. And chances are you can learn something along the way, right, Sean? If you only have 1 fork, you still know how to shred chicken.
That's true. That's true. Or worst case scenario, you just start using your hands. But
yeah,
then you got to tell people like, hey, my hands were in this. And
oh, you don't tell people that. Your hands are always in the food.
It's the TikTok trend is like, you can't eat food at everybody's house. And it's just like people doing the most insane things when it's cooking. Like leave like, oh yeah, there's so many of them. But yeah, you just don't tell them that part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cooked with love means that I licked the spoon and then used it again.
Possibly.
So we've kind of talked about this a little bit, Krista, and I know we wanted to really kind of hit on this, but when it comes to like building connections, not even with like a dating partner, but just like with other people, why is food so important when it comes to making connections, or how is it so integral in those?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like what we touched on before, that food is an important part of pretty much everything we do. But when you're cooking with somebody, and you're right, not just partners, but think back how many people, and Amanda, you would probably know this as well as anyone, cooking with your grandparents or your parents, right? And it's a hands-on task that everybody's involved in, but it creates conversation like, okay, I'm finished chopping the onions. What should I do now? And the more you're interacting in any given task, it doesn't have to be, you know, how do you feel about, walking the dog when I say I'm tired? It doesn't have to be stuff like that. It can just be, now I've done this. What would you like me to do next? And if you're interacting with somebody and sharing that task, it's a bonding moment, and you're taking it from the chore of, oh, I've got to make dinner again, and you're doing it by yourself, to bringing somebody into the kitchen. And I think that it's human nature when you're sharing a task and doing something together, that you're just connecting and talking while you do it. And I think that that makes it a really great situation to spend time with somebody and connect with them. But it's also, food is about taste and about touch and sight and smell, and it brings the senses into it. So it's sort of an all around event, not just the talking or the, thinking or the planning. It's brings your senses into it, which makes it sort of a full body experience as well.
Yeah, and I want the people who may be listening, who are the ones like, well, I'm the one in the kitchen, like this is my kitchen, no other cooks. It's like, maybe start thinking about letting your partner in the kitchen with you, because maybe they have some things that they are really good at making, for one, that you've just never given them the opportunity to do. But maybe they also know some things that they could teach you.
Well, and kitchens are very territorial, right? I mean, I think I've told you before that I didn't used to cook well with anybody else. But it's learning. If you love somebody, whether it's your grandparents or your children or your parents or your partner, then it's worth being able to get past that hump of not wanting somebody to cook with you, learning to open yourself and your kitchen up to share it with somebody. And it's a great like team building experience, right? Because you say, I don't want anybody in the kitchen, and you have to intentionally say, okay, this person is coming to cook with me, and it's going to have to be okay with me. And then you sort of, I don't want to say force yourself, because that sounds negative, but you set the intention for it to be okay, and you consciously allow them to help you. And the first time maybe is difficult, and the second time is a little easier, and the third time it's a lot easier, and then the fourth time it's a lot of fun. But it can be a growth thing where you're allowing somebody else into this little area that you normally dominate. And I think that that's all positive and growth when you're sharing your life with somebody.
Yeah, so a couple of things about like what you just said. One, like it's a way to practice letting go a little bit of that control. So
Right.
if you're a person who just really feels like I have to have control in the kitchen, like it's just what I need, you can start little bits, letting go of that control and letting someone else have a little bit of that control and be a part of the final outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like as you cook with someone more and more, like you said, the first time it's going to be rough, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second time, maybe not quite as much. Third time, maybe a little bit less. You're getting used to letting go of a little bit of that control, but you're also learning how to do it together. So it's not going to be as bad, quote unquote, the next time because you've learned what pieces you like to do with each other. I really like to chop up the vegetables, but I don't want to touch the raw meat. So let's and then the next time you just know, like, okay, I'm going in and I'm cutting these vegetables and they're going to touch the meat. And it can make the whole thing more enjoyable because you don't have to look at that piece that you dread doing because you have the support of someone else who's going to do it.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we are self-sovereign, right? We get to choose how we react to something. And if we go in and say, okay, this is not what I normally do, but I'm choosing to be okay with it and accept it, then, that makes all the difference. If you go in with the mindset that this is going to be terrible, it's never going to work out, chances are it won't.
One of the things I want to highlight, that's something that you said, Amanda, is when we're looking at relationships in terms like of communication. Well, if the two of you are working in a kitchen together, there has to be some kind of communication, especially if your kitchen's not like super big. Like, you've got to figure out how to not only maneuver in that space with each other, but then also how do you collaborate effectively. So when we're working on trying to establish and build good, healthy relationships with people, cooking can be a way to help start easing into that conversation of how do we work together as a team? How do we problem solve? And this is a safer environment. I mean, there's knives, but it's a safer environment than maybe like having to have a real discussion with somebody about, hey, I don't like it when you do this thing, or I don't like how you're responding in this moment. In the kitchen, you can kind of start to see some of those things come up and work on them there.
Exactly. It's communication and connection. And that invariably, you increase your connection, you increase your communication, then you increase, the love and the passion and everything else that goes along with it. It doesn't have to be, sitting down, having an awkward conversation. This is a hands-on, more functional approach, if you will.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting into that point because I know we wanted to talk about how cooking can help us be more intentional in our relationships. And this kind of like feels like that good transition part for it because, yeah, when you're communicating more with your partner, when you're working with them as a team and collaborating, like that helps us be a bit more intentional. But is there more to that?
Yeah, I mean, the very first step of being intentional is agreeing to do it in the first place, right? Is agreeing and deciding that you're going to set that time aside, because it's so easy for all of us to say, oh, we're too busy, we don't have time for this. But we do. I mean, you think about the time you spend on your phone, or you go to the gym, or watching your favorite thing on TV. You have time. So you want to be intentional. The first step is to say, we're going to do this in the first place. And then, like you said, you're being intentional that you are going to create a meal together, and you're going to share the work, and you're going to enjoy the outcome together, right? It's all being aware of what it is that you're doing and the end goal, right? The end goal is not necessarily making dinner. Hopefully that will be one of the results, but the end goal is to connect more, spend time together, doing more than just, checking in at the end of the day and saying, how's your day? Great. How's yours? Great. Okay, I'm going to go make dinner. You are at the end of this meal, creating the meal together. Hopefully what you've done is talked and communicated and connected in a different, non-threatening way.
And that communication piece of deciding what it is you're going to cook, right? Because you can, like, 90% of the time, it's what do you want for dinner? I don't know. What do you want? I don't care. So then it always falls on one person to be the one to decide, okay, this is what I'm going to make, or this is what we're going to have. If you're like planning out like a week ahead or something like that, and you can sit down and you can talk about it, flip through a recipe book or scroll on a Pinterest page or something like that and be like, oh, this looks really good. That's something that we could maybe try. And then your partner says like, yeah, but I don't like the onion in it or whatever. And so maybe you figure out a way to change the recipe, or maybe you just look at something different. But it's not just that time of cooking with somebody that you can have that communication. It's all the prep work too.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, which is that the prep work does begin with choosing the recipe. But I think to optimize that, like you said, sitting at the beginning of the week and planning the meals, as opposed to at 6 o'clock at night saying, what are we going to do for dinner? I don't know. What are we going to do for dinner? Right? start a little in advance, set the intention that you're going to make the meals together, and then have a discussion. And of course, it doesn't have to be confrontational because, like you said, this looks great. Well, I don't like onions. Well, do you think maybe we could modify it, or should we just pick something else, right? And it can be a discussion. Nobody's going to argue about what you're making for dinner sometime later in the week, or hopefully they won't. But it's again, it furthers the conversation.
Yeah, it's something my wife and I do regularly. It'll be Sunday. I'm like, so what do we want for dinner this week? Because I will order groceries, because the intent was I would work out, and then after I worked out, go pick up the groceries. But now it's just me ordering groceries. But we would try to figure out like our week menu of like what we want to have that week. And we have like our standard staple where it's like, we're going to order salmon every week. We're going to eat salmon. But it's what recipes does she like me cooking, or does she want to have cooked this week, or is there something new? Like the example, Jordan was like, I haven't had tortellini in a while. So she found this recipe of like sun-dried tomato chicken tortellini. I have never made this thing, so this is going to be an adventure for the both of us. So I'm going to make her make this with me. But I'm really excited to try and make a new recipe, especially something that she was excited that she found. So really fun. And one of the things you mentioned in there, Krista, was when we're being intentional, it's like you're going to do the thing, be aware of like what you're doing, and actually be present for that with the end goal of connecting more and spending time. There's probably a lot of people listening who have had that moment in their relationship where they're just like, we're kind of just like doing, like we both work, we come home, how's your day? Cool, do our own things. Cooking can be a way to add some of that intentionality into your relationship if it's feeling like you're not connecting with your partner as much as you want. But it's also, like we talked about earlier, giving you a good like practice trial run for stuff, because then you can take that out and go to like, hey, I think it would be really fun if we joined this volleyball league together. I think it would be really fun if we tried to do X, Y, or Z together, or do something like that. And cooking, like we said, is a safer environment to try those things in, and then extend that out into other things in our lives too.
Yep, definitely. I mean, it's choosing to spend the time first in the kitchen and then doing it. And there's so many things, so many conversation points and things you can use to get the conversation going. One thing I always like to say is ask your partner if they've ever pretended to be allergic to something because they didn't want to eat it, things like that. And there's so many funny things that you can talk about. And then the more you talk, the more that comes up. And like you said, and then it's like, you know what, this is so much fun. What else can we do that would be fun together? Right. There's a guy online. I've seen him on Instagram. He's got a program called Show Her Off, and it's couples dancing. And he teaches them how to do these amazing dance moves. And I think it's mostly, they all have cowboy boots on. So like country music thing. Mm-hmm. But he does videos where he teaches couples how to do a couple basic but really kind of fun and sexy dance moves together, right? So there's a lot of ways that people can connect, but if you get in the kitchen and you start connecting and talking, then it can grow from there and see where you want to go and other things that you want to branch out to.
And it's a great way to be intentional about, especially if your partner has different health concerns. Like if they are diabetic, then you're spending the time looking for meals that have a low glycemic index or that don't have sugar added into them. Your partner says they're really trying to like bulk up, so we're going to go heavy on protein because I care about you and what you want. Or, partner says I'm trying to lose some weight, so we're going to do some low calorie recipes. Like taking that active role in doing something that is going to help with their health can really help like bond a couple together, especially like because after you've been together for a long time or you're starting to get older, then these are the things that pop up that concern you, are like, oh, each other's health concerns. So not that I'm there by any means, just put that out there. I'm young and spry and whatever. but
But it's absolutely true, because my partner has diabetes, right? So this is something that we talk about all the time, and he loves dessert. It's like, okay, how can what's my workaround for this? And even, I read an article the other day about an artificial sweetener and how it has been linked to heart disease and higher incidence of stroke or whatever. And I'm like, okay, you can't have that anymore. We're done. And he goes, but you said it was good for me. I said, well, apparently it's not. So we're not having that anymore. But and then it becomes a workaround to find something different so that he can still satisfy his sweet tooth with worrying about his diabetes.
I saw the same article, and my dad is the same way. He has diabetes, but also tends to like sweets. So I talked to him the one day. He's like, I need to see this. I need to see the stuff you're adding to your things just so you can eat them. And I was like, nope, you can't eat this because you also have heart problems, and this leads to more heart problems. And then we got into the fun discussion of well, what one comes first? Do people end up having heart problems because they were using this artificial sweetener, or do people have heart problems and therefore use the artificial sweetener? So it was a fun discussion with my dad, but it's also why a lot of the cooking that I do doesn't include added salt, which I know some people are like, how do you cook without adding salt? There's other seasonings you can use.
There's workarounds.
But my dad, because for a very long time, has known he has heart problems. I think I was 6 or 7 when he had his first heart attack. So for a good majority of my life living with my parents, salt was never an additive to foods. So when I first started cooking for other people, they're like, there's no salt. This is you could add it. You don't need it in there to start, but that's why. So it gives you a learning opportunity about somebody too, based on what they're adding or what they're not adding to the foods that they're choosing to make.
Yeah, and a great way, again, to show you care, to show an interest, is to say, you know what, your health is important to me as well. So we're going to find a workaround rather than, oh, well, you can't have sugar. Well, okay, here's a piece of toast for you, and I'm going to have this wonderful, whatever. It's sharing in their needs, dietary restrictions or whatever.
Yeah, and it's when we're looking at relationships too, when it comes to that planning out or that cooking of my wife and I every Sunday, well, what are we making? It can be really easy to move that into just feeling like the chore of grocery shopping or the chore of having to cook a meal every night for the rest of your life. So when it's coming, like we talked about, it's for people who could be feeling oh, well, we're just kind of slogging through, we're just in that routine of the relationship. So using cooking to help kind of break up that routine a little bit or feel more connection. So how can they use the mundane task of grocery shopping, or maybe that feeling of being mundane while cooking, to make it feel a little bit less mundane?
I think it comes down to, again, it comes down to the intentional aspect of it. And, instead of just saying, okay, you go to the grocery store and come back and I'll make dinner, say, how about we go to the grocery store? And when you're in the grocery store, you're talking about things, right? It's, oh, look, have you ever had one of these? I've never tried one of these. Should we get one? Yeah, let's try that out. And I'm like a kid in a candy store in the grocery store, right? I'm like, oh, look, oh, look, oh, look, oh, look. Put me in a grocery store in Europe and it's downright dangerous because I'm excited about everything that's there. But going out with the intention of saying this is an outing for us together, not just I have to go grocery shopping, right? And then come home and do dinner, and we're gonna make dinner together. It's not just you go in the kitchen. And we have an open concept house, and the main thing for me is always, I was stuck in the kitchen because I did all the cooking and I cooked a lot. But when it's open, then everybody can be around and everybody can be part of it. And even when my partner's not helping me, he's sitting at the bar talking to me while I'm doing it, right? And it's choosing to make it something that's more than just a chore. And a lot of it is just mindset. I touched on this earlier, if you think it's going to be terrible, it's going to be terrible. But if you say this is going to be fun and we're going to make it fun, then your mind starts saying, let's find ways to make it fun, right? And it's the intention of doing it and wanting it to be a positive outcome, and going into it with a positive expectation.
Yeah. I was just
And
reminded. Oh, go ahead.
saying even if it's not something that you just like inherently enjoy cooking or whatever, and neither does your partner, misery loves company, right? Like if there's a task that needs to be done that neither of us want to do, like we're going to do that task together because at least we're doing it together. And it took me a long time to realize that, like, if my husband's taking out the trash and he's got 2 bags in his hands and he's like, "Hey, will you come open the trash can outside for me?" He doesn't want to take the trash out. It's not an enjoyable thing for him to take the trash out. And in my head, I'm like, you can set down a bag and open up the trash lid with the other hand. But it's just that point of like, okay, if I come out there with you and open the trash lid, we've done this together and it's less daunting. It's less of a terrible chore, even if it is just something so simple like that. So even if cooking isn't your thing and you really are just like, I just need to eat to live kind of person, which I don't understand, but I'm sure there's people like that out there, you can still do it together and still get a level of enjoyment in the fact that you don't have to do it all alone.
And I've said that with, like, not just, and exactly how you said, not just within the scope of cooking, but you can say to your partner, okay, you rake the leaves and I will, pick up the garbage or whatever. Or you can say, hey, let's rake the leaves and then we'll pick up the garbage, right? You can divide and conquer, and you are dividing and conquering. But if you say, hey, let's do it together, and then each chore is done faster, you're ticking something off your list faster, and you're spending the time together. And you're bound to talk and have discussions about it, right? It doesn't always have to be you do that, you do that. It can be let's do it together.
Yeah. And even looking at the grocery shopping thing too, is you might be able to learn from your things about your partner you didn't know. Like maybe they've just never purchased something at the store with you because it's something they thought about, or it's like a seasonal thing and you haven't been together long enough for that season to have come through, and you're like, oh, I never realized you liked those things. I love that too. When you were talking about like a kid in a candy store, like especially like in European grocery stores, Krista, it reminded me just yesterday. Those of you listening, we're going to be well into pumpkin season. But when we're recording this, we're not quite there yet. So we were at Meijer's the other day and we just had like pick up a couple things really quick. But I walked past the pastry section because I'm like, I know we're close. We're close to pumpkins. And they had pumpkin squares. And I love pumpkin squares. And Jordan was making fun of me the rest of this trip home because she's like, other than our wedding day, I don't think I've seen your face light up as much as you did when you found those pumpkin squares. I'm like, yeah, because they're the best. So it's like those little things too. Like you get to see your partner thoroughly enjoy or be excited about something, even if it's something as dumb as pumpkin squares.
Yeah. Well, the running joke at our house is that my partner, who's diabetic, loves dessert. So when the kids want, like, on a Sunday night, we're having a nice dinner, I will make dessert. And he's not going to drop dead if he has dessert, right? So he will have dessert. And my joke is always, did you see how fast the little diabetic kid at the end of the table ate his dessert? Because I swear I blink and its dessert's gone. And I'm like, wow, that was really fast. But he's so excited. Partly it's because he has diabetes and he can't eat it all the time, but he just really enjoys it. And, I love seeing that. It makes him happy. It's that little moment of, the sheepish smile on his face. And yeah, it's great to see it.
My dad, he's gone now, but when he was still alive, he was diabetic. And so, we were always on him about not having sweets in the house, because if they were in the house, he would eat too much of them and he wouldn't be able to like whatever. So, he wouldn't have them just in the house at all. But when we would come over for dinner, oh, we were getting a cake or a pie or something because, oh, they're here. And this is an excuse because they're here. And, we're going to have 6 people splitting this cake. So there's not going to be all that left over that I'm just going to sit there and eat. But he would light up, like, just so excited about, like, well, what are we gonna have for dessert? Like, he didn't care about what we were having for dinner.
All about the dessert. Yeah.
All about the dessert.
I will get, like, if I make a cheesecake or even birthday cakes or whatever, Billy and I, it's my partner, have zero willpower. And so we pack it all up and give it to the kids and say, take this to your dad. And he's familiar with my cooking because we were married years ago, and he's always very excited when the desserts end up at his house. And sometimes I wonder if Billy's going to be annoyed because we keep giving my ex-husband the desserts, but he understands that it's self-preservation for us, right? You can't make one slice, you have to make the whole thing. So we have some, and then we say, take this to your dad.
Yeah, I'm my dad's guardian, in quotes, when I go over to his house, because he's diabetic and they will still buy sweets, not as often, but when I see them there, I'm like, oh, well, sorry, Dad, I guess I have to eat this because I know that if it's here, you're gonna do it. So
You're such a good son.
I know it is a cross I'm willing
sacrifice.
to bear.
Yeah.
Well, what I also hope people can get from this piece right here is the main point that we're trying to get across with cooking is, like, it's a very good way to connect with other people. Everybody has stories when it comes to food, or things that they like to eat, things they don't like to eat, times that they used the wrong milk to make mashed potatoes, times that they forgot to check on a pot of pasta and ended up boiling all of the water out of the pasta. It's like we all have these stories around food, and even if you're, like, in a social situation that's, like, hard to talk to people, if you have food there, you at least have some kind of in. And yeah, I just think that's the cool part about food.
How many conversations start around a buffet, right?
Because we all have to eat, but we don't all have to eat well. But we should all eat well, and we should all enjoy it.
I don't eat well in a sense that's all healthy, but
that's not what I meant by well.
Eat deliciously.
Eat deliciously.
Yes.
Enjoyably.
Exactly.
So, Krista, if we had somebody listening who was wanting to try to implement some of this in their relationships, where would you recommend that they start?
Start by picking a meal and inviting their partner to create it with them. Find something that you really want, that you really like, and say, you know what, I would like to do this. Can we do it? And I always say, just ask, right? Don't sit around hoping that they're going to bring it up, or hope, or drop them, send them hints, right? Just ask. Say, you know what, I'd like to do this, whether it's take a cooking class together, whether it's picking a meal and creating it together. Just ask and say, hey, I would like to do this, and I want to do it with you. Let them know you can create a meal on your own, but you want to do it with them.
Just think about how that might also, like, make your partner feel too. Like, this is a task that you're like, I want to do this with you. I mean, I have the full abilities to do it on my own. I can, but I want this to be something that we do together.
Exactly. It shows you're interested. It shows you care. It shows that they are important to you.
And then let's say that they do have that conversation. Do you have any, like, easy-ish recipes that you might be able to suggest they try out?
I do. There's always a few things that are basic that you can do and bring together. Do you want, like, specific names? I have some recipes I could give you. It's coming up to the fall season, and one that I really love that I've done in cooking classes that have been really popular is a coq au vin. It sounds really fancy, complicated, but it's actually not. It's pretty basic stuff. And that gives a meal that has so much flavor, and it's just such an amazing meal. And I think something like that is a great thing to start with, because there's a lot involved. So it's not over and done in 10 minutes like you're making craft dinner, but it's fairly foolproof, and it's so delicious at the end. You know, the house smells amazing and you sit down to a wonderful meal with your partner. It's like, damn, look what we did. This is amazing.
So I'm not going to be like, I'm going to need the full instructions here. So like, I don't need the preheat oven to 375 and then, but what is the like ingredient list or like?
Well, it's a French dish, obviously. It started out as a way to use the roosters when the hen stopped laying or the rooster was too old to perform his roosterly duties. So you'd have this somewhat tough, somewhat gamey rooster. And in fact, I was making it in France one day, and I told my neighbor I was making it. I had a chicken in the fridge. He goes, "No, you need a cock, not a chicken." And I'm like, "Pardon me." So he goes home, brings me home a rooster that he had in his freezer. But nowadays you just make it with chicken. But it's, you marinate the chicken with carrots and onions and celery and peppercorns and tomato and red wine. And newsflash, the red wine boils off. There's no alcohol in this. It's just used as a flavor, but you can use a de-alcoholized red wine as well. But you marinate it, and then you brown the chicken in a little bit of oil. You strain out the marinade and put that in as a sauce and let it cook and thicken. And then at the end, you add a little bit of what's called a beurre manier, which is just the easiest way to thicken something ever. You take butter, mix it with flour, make it into a paste, and then you can drop it in the sauce and whisk it, and it doesn't clump or anything. And then you have this amazing, rich, beautifully slow-cooked chicken, and it's delicious. And you can do it in a slow cooker with chicken thighs, and then you know what you can do with the chicken thighs after they've cooked in the slow cooker. I'll give you a hint. It involves 2 forks.
Shred it.
Right? Coq au vin shredded chicken. I mean, it's versatile, it's easy, but it is so delicious.
No, that does sound really good. I could also just see like plating it with like a mashed potato and using that sauce like right over top of the chicken with it and just having it be like really good. So
good.
As long as it's not vanilla mashed
yeah.
potatoes.
Well, I don't recommend using the vanilla almond milk in the mashed potatoes or beet juice.
Yes.
Just add some like slight red food coloring if you want.
Right?
Beet juice colored mashed potatoes.
Maybe you need a good Halloween dish, and so you need some deep red mashed potatoes to.
Yes.
Oh, that would be like adding the brains or something, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I will make sure that if you have a recipe link for that, Krista, please send it to me and I'll make sure it's in the show notes. If not, I will find one and throw that in the show notes if anybody is interested in trying out that recipe with their partners.
Oh, I absolutely have the recipe all done up and in fairly easy to follow steps. So I will be happy to share that with you.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Well, Krista, we have very much enjoyed having you here today. It's always a pleasure talking to you and then also talking about food. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was great talking to you.
If anyone wanted to find you on social media, where could they find you?
I always direct people just to my Facebook profile because that's the best way to kind of take a peek into my life and see who I am and see if I'm someone you'd like to connect with. And that's just Krista Melanson, Krista Melanson. And on Instagram, I am at _relationship chef, all one word.
Awesome. And links to those will be in the show notes. Also, I apologize now for mispronouncing your last name at the start of the episode.
Oh, that's okay. We get all sorts of, if I'm somewhere French, they call me Melanson. And Melanson. Yeah, there's no right or wrong way.
Well, I apologize anyway.
Well, thank you. I put the coq au vin recipes in the chat.
Yes, I saw it. I'll make sure that I have a link for that into the show notes too. So thank you for that. And thanks again for joining us today, Krista. And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and new content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.